isn't it? This is actually about just purging the Labour left in a way that no previous Labour administration, not Kinnock, not Blair, has tried.
Well, in that, people in positions of power are clearly not abiding by the rules.
We have now got left-wing Labour MPs in the Commons having to obey orders from a whip who used to be a Tory person who said, and I quote, "Labour, what a bunch of see you next Tuesdays." And I'm going to kick it off straight away. We're going to start off by watching a discussion between Owen Jones and Michael Crick regarding the Labour selection process, which has already been castigated by Michael Crick on Twitter as being corrupt. Obviously, we all know that it's corrupt, but it's nice to have somebody who's technically a mainstream media journalist actually bothering to cover it, rather than just saying, well, that's just politics and it's good that they're doing that because liberals are just authoritarians who hate democracy, which happens most of the time. So actually seeing a liberal journalist cover it and saying, no, actually, adhering to democratic principles is good. That's a good thing that you can do. It'll be interesting to see. So without further ado, let's have a look. I mean, you gotta expect it. Like he wasn't even expecting it, right? The whole kind of the line from the kind of liberal media, mainstream media, up until this point, right, has always just been, oh well, there's the threat of Stalinism if Jeremy Corbyn tries to turn the entire party into Trotskyist militant, etc., nouveau Bolsheviks or whatever, when really he actually was the only person who had a real commitment to democracy. And that now they're like, oh, hang on a minute, the centrists can do this too. And I'm like, yes, mainstream media, that's the thing that can happen. So I said, at least Crick is honestly reporting on it, much to the chagrin of members of the Labour right, who keep getting very angry with him telling basic facts.
Hello. Welcome to the show. Now, barring an almighty political upset, admittedly, we have had quite a few of those in recent years, Labour are almost certainly going to form the next government when a disintegrating Conservative political project finally collapses in about 2 years' time. Now, no government in British democratic history, I would argue, has so thoroughly self-immolated as the current administration. Now, in this time of crisis, and let's be honest...
No, I don't you get it, Owen? It's all his neoliberal posturing and saying that he's going to do exactly what the Tories are going to do. That's what's giving him the poll lead. It's definitely not the fact that the Tories have entirely imploded and handed the next election to Labour on a plate. It's Keir Starmer's sensible centrist policy platform that's really inspired the public to want to vote for Labour. Sorry, I can't keep that up.
Pretty exhausting, relentless turmoil. What we're talking about today might seem parochial to you. Maybe even seems a bit obscure. The internal machinations of a political party. You might think, why does this matter in the grand scheme of things? Not least given the manifest injustices that the current government, I think many of us would agree, are responsible for. But democracy is a precious thing. And if a party leadership shows contempt for the democracy of its own party, it raises questions about how it will treat democracy more widely, and indeed its critics, not just internally, but externally. Now, 3 years ago, Keir Starmer launched his bid for the party leadership, the leader, of course, of the Labour Party. And after the trauma of the 2019 electoral cataclysm, his pitch really did hit, I think, the sweet spot of a party membership, which was very traumatised, not just by the defeat, but I'd say pretty tired by the Labour civil wars of the second half of the 2010s. Now, his promise was to maintain the radical domestic political prospectus of his predecessor, but professionalise it and bring about party unity. Labour would be a broad church, he promised. And crucially, he said, Labour members would be able to freely choose their candidates without interference from the party leadership. Now...
Wow, that lasted long, didn't it, folks? That one lasted super fucking long, didn't it? Oh, we're really feeling the internal party democracy right now, aren't we, guys?
No one can credibly or honestly say that Keir Starmer has kept to the letter, or frankly, the spirit of his leadership campaign. Many of those who are often very eloquent, rightly, about the dishonesty and the lack of integrity of the Conservatives are themselves, if we're honest, silent about this brazen deceit. Their objection is not to dishonesty, but rather to being on the receiving end of it. And they believe that the destruction of left-wing politics is a noble end and therefore all means are justified. Now, Starmer has abandoned much of his domestic policies, most famously enshrined in the so-called 10 pledges. The left has been driven from the front bench, and crucially, party selections have been systematically rigged to ensure that only candidates, almost exclusively, not entirely, but almost exclusively, who are loyal to the political.
And Owen is super correct here to call out the hypocrisy as well of all the people who were previously saying that, the main thing that Boris Johnson was being, vilified for, and rightly so, was, things like lying to Parliament, lying in general, the normalisation of political lying. Oh, Peter Owen's got a really good book about the kind of assault on truth from, the right-wing, both press and media establishment, right? He's really good. He's done really good exposés on that. And people are quite rightly angry with how much lying was done. Yet, when it actually comes to, the opposition telling the truth, as long as the targets are seen to be as legitimate, which the political left within the Labour Party are, in these people's eyes, sufficiently legitimate as a target, they think that it's just good politics as far as they're concerned, because again, they don't view the left as legitimate political actors, and they see their elimination from politics as a good thing because they don't believe in political pluralism. These liberals genuinely believe that they should have the authority to be able to dictate to everybody else how politics should or shouldn't work.
Political direction of the leadership can stand as MPs. With the Labour left, which has existed since the party was founded, which has included luminaries like Nye Bevan, the former leader of the Labour left, who, of course, founded the National Health Service, the left barred from being selected as prospective candidates. From the promise of Corbynism with a professional face, we have Blairism, if I'm going to be a bit snarky, with a less charismatic face. Now,
Starmer is certainly to the right of Blair on at least some issues, right? I mean, I would have given him somewhat of a benefit of the doubt with regard to that comparison if it had not been revealed that it was literally just Lou Haig's insistence on the nationalisation of the railways that it actually got into the official party platform for renationalisation, right? So there's nothing down to Keir Starmer, entirely down to pressure put on him from outside. In fact, a lot of the green stuff that we're getting being pushed by the party at the moment is explicitly on the table because of Ed Miliband and not to do with Keir Starmer. Again, it's people to the left of Starmer within the Labour apparatus, right? Some, even members of the actual kind of right wing of the Labour Party forcing Starmer to the left because they at least have a modicum of principle, which Keir Starmer obviously doesn't have.
I'm going to bring in, just in a second, the brilliant journalist Michael Crick, who is formerly of Channel 4 News, but of lots and lots of many different hats. We're going to talk to John McDonnell later.
How do you go to the right of Blair and stay in Labour? Because we have first past the post, and because our political system is dominated by two parties. If you're a career politician, if you want someone who wants to make a career out of getting into politics and making money from politics and using those connections to get you a future career in the banking industry or in the speaking industry or, for example, in the media, etc., then if you want to be able to get into politics, in the vast majority of seats in this country, your choice is Labour or Conservative. So what this has done is watered down the platform of both parties, for example. That's why Liz Truss is seen as an aberration rather than the norm for the Conservative Party, despite the fact that she's backed by huge amounts of the membership, same way that Corbyn and Corbyn's policies are backed by huge amounts of the Labour membership, because the people who actually control the reins of power in the party are the political careerists who've joined these parties because they have no other choice if they want to make a career out of politics. That's the long and short of it, really, right? And Keir Starmer wanted to make a career out of politics, so he had to join the Labour Party, right? That's why you've seen such a sharp turn to the right now, and why he has abandoned all of his principles, and why people are happy to see him lying, because they don't really care about that. All they care about is red team good and getting someone with a red rosette into number 10, rather than any actual political principle, any actual political utility, or any actual good policy. And because these people who are careerists are the people who are going to be the most susceptible to capital interests, these are people who are going to be more likely to hold the reins of power, or to be able to have the ability to be able to manufacture consent to gain the reins of power. It's the necessity of first past the post as a system necessitates political centrism, right? Consensus politics is necessitated by first past the post, because both parties have to win over a mythical swing voter between the two parties, because everything is so centralised within the political duopoly, right? Unless there are some certain seats where that's not the case, but in the vast majority of seats, that is just the case, right?
Who used to be, of course, Shadow Chancellor, who's written to Keir Starmer about the selection process. If you're watching live, do click on the YouTube link and press like and subscribe. You can support the channel by using Super Chat, and then I will read out all those Super Chats. I will put those questions to our esteemed guests.
Woody Red with a follow on Twitch. Welcome to the No Justice stream. I hope you're doing well.
If you're listening on the podcast, as ever, hello, do leave a review. Great, let's bring in Michael. Hey, Michael, how you doing, buddy? Great to see you. I'm glad, actually, great knitwear from Michael Crick, which I say that because John McDonnell is also famous for his knitwear, so I should have joined the party there. It's not a Michael. You know what? I mean, I don't want to make you feel like old or whatever, but because I grew up, of course, watching your face on television. You are an award-winning journalist. Now, you have been following more closely than any other journalist in the country the selections process of the Labour Party. So I just want to start with a tweet from Keir Starmer from the 2020 leadership election. He said the selections for Labour candidates needs to be more democratic and we should end NEC impositions of candidates. Local party members should select their candidates for every election. Has that promise been maintained?
Well, technically, by an NEC imposition, I suppose he means, well, the NEC say, right, here's the shortlist or here's the candidate, like it or lump it. But of course, he's broken what he said there. And I mean, what's fascinating is that the network of people around Starmer, all of whom have got a background in those.
It's also worth noting that a lot of this stuff about the potential kind of Stalinist coup from Jeremy Corbyn, right, was done under the shadow of the 2017 election, which was a snap election, right? And the Labour rules as they are says that under a snap election, if there's not enough time to go through the full selection process, the NEC can choose candidates in the event of a snap election, right? So there's a huge difference between someone like Claudia Webb getting selected quickly for Leicester East in 2017 and us having the Labour Party having a selection process right now for an election that might not be for another 2 years, where the NEC are getting massively involved, where whole amounts of selection committees and CLPs are all quitting in unison in protest over the amount of meddling within the selection process, right? These things are really not comparable to each other.
Right-wing Labour groups that try to keep the right-wing Labour flag flying during the Corbyn years, groups like Labour First, Labour to Win, Progress. There's a group of individuals who have basically got pretty much exclusive charge of the candidate selection process at a national level, aided by regional directors of the Labour Party. And they've been basically fixing these selections right across the country, and in such a way that it appears that they don't want to just sort of make sure that the balance is pro-Starmer, but that the left is almost annihilated completely. Now, this sort of thing's gone on in the old days, and frankly, your friends on the left tried to do it in 2019 and 2017 and got a few people chosen, and there were often some pretty unfortunate things happening to people on the right who were purged, frankly, in the
that's just not true. Like, as I just explained about the 2017 selection process.
Corbyn years, and it happened in the days of Blair and Wilson and everybody, but it didn't happen under any of those leaders in such a way as that you try and eliminate all of your opponents, like something out of Eastern Europe or North Korea or modern day Russia. And that is, I mean,
comparing Keir Starmer to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, that's quite a comparison, Michael. I mean, I'm not going to deny that, but
what I find fascinating, and the methods they use as well. It's all done quite quietly behind the scenes, subtly, because nobody wants to be known as what's called the lotto candidate, the leader of the opposition candidate, because local parties do guard their independence. They don't want to feel that somebody's being imposed. Nonetheless, individuals who look like they're not troublemakers, who aren't going to cause Starmer any trouble when he's in government, have quietly behind the scenes been imposed somewhere. So there's only really, of the 57 candidates, 2 more chosen this afternoon.
All right, all Modcons, good to have you on. Good to have you in the chat. I mean, definitely are dirty tricks, yeah.
Chosen so far. There's only one really that I would say, and I'm sure you probably agree, is on the left, and that's Faiza Shaheen in Chingford and Woodford Green in Duncan Smith's seat. She fought it last time, a very good economist. But the left have almost left the battlefield. They found it very, very difficult to get on the short lists or the long lists, simply because of the activities of the National Party, the National Executive, and the regional offices, and all the little clever tricks they play. And I'm only aware of a part of what's been going on. And I mean, my background, I'm sort of politically, I'm middle of the road, I'm right-wing Labour, Liberal, that sort of area. But I'm also a pluralist, and I just think this is not right. That you need, the Labour Party has always been.
I can't believe a liberal who has principles. Wow, Jesus Christ, Michael. What a turnout for the books.
strong when it's had a significant left representation throughout its ranks, and particularly at the top. And that's not going to happen really in the next parliamentary Labour Party or in the next Labour government, if there is one.
I think it's really important what the point you just made. Want to emphasise that, because me and John McDonnell, who will be on shortly afterwards, I suppose it's easier to dismiss us lefties, disgruntled about being defeated and smashed, I would say, by very deceitful means, but nonetheless, easy to write it off, sore losers, all the rest of it. You're coming from this actually from a perspective of journalistic integrity and a commitment to pluralism, not actually because you're a flag bearer for the Labour left, because you're not. I mean, that's what makes you so credible. And that's why I think your voice in this is so crucial. Could we just use this case study? Okay, Lauren Townsend. So for those listening on the podcast, we've flashed up an image of Lauren Townsend. I've met Lauren Townsend a few times. She's very charismatic. She largely brought up by a single mum in Milton Keynes. Came to the Labour Party through the Labour movement, organising in the service sector, which is very, very low levels of unionisation, that led a tips campaign, TGI Friday, got huge numbers of people in TGI Friday unionised. Not quite an achievement, I would say, in the modern trade union movement. She had a huge amount of support from unions, including Unison, who aren't a left-wing trade union, but also, for example, the candidate in Milton Keynes South, who isn't on the left of the party either. What happened with Lauren Townsend?
Well, she was. What happens is people put their names forward and they get interviewed by this NEC panel to draw up a long list, and she was accused of various things. But I mean, there were a couple which were frankly ridiculous. I mean, last year, the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon tweeted that that fortunately a COVID test that she'd had proved negative, and Lauren Townsend tweeted that she liked that.
She just pressed like, just to be clear. She didn't tweet anything. She just liked it.
Yeah. And this was one of the things held against her under the category of support for other parties. But what was she supposed to say? I wish, if only it had been possible.
And literally, the comparisons made to things like Russia and North Korea, where they will literally invent trumped-up charges to try and prosecute you in those countries under the law, rather than under like internal party stuff. But even so, right, literally, essentially becomes show trials to get people suspended because you have factual disagreements with them, and finding any trumped up charges with which to do it. It would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous to democracy.
Positive or something. I mean, it was really, and she was also supported, and she was also accused of backing a campaign that wants a tougher new Green Deal than the Labour Party official policy. I mean, and this is going on all over the place, that people's social media paths are being dredged through. And, we've all said something, maybe it's a bit silly or a bit untoward on social media over the years. But if you're on the left, or if you look like a troublemaker, then you're out with the slightest excuse. But the same standards are not held the other way around in my view. And indeed, Christian Wakeford, the Conservative MP, who was the Conservative MP for Bury South, he was welcomed into the Labour Party. He hasn't even had to go through the trigger process, whereby
he's now part of the whips. We have now got left-wing Labour MPs in the Commons having to obey orders from a whip who used to be a Tory person, who said, and I quote, "Labour, what a bunch of see you next Tuesdays." Like, it's the situation is ridiculous, where they're far happier with actual Tory MPs being whips, huge amounts of donations from the private sector, which is obviously normally against what the Labour Party stands for, given that it is the party representing the trade union movement, especially when one of those new people from the private sector being invited to the conference is bloody Royal Mail, in the middle of an industrial dispute between an affiliated union and the Royal Mail. But if you're a left-wing candidate, future candidate, and you like the wrong tweet, that's it, out. Right? People having memberships expelled over this kind of stuff, which we now know why they were doing this. It got exposed in the Ford report. We know that there's people in a Labour HQ who will literally call this trot hunting and have competitions to see how many people they can get suspended from the party for stepping outside the proper bounds of the ideological groupthink of the centre right of the party.
The party decides whether they want to reselect him and have other candidates. And as I said on Twitter yesterday, the easiest way to become a Labour MP these days seems to be to become a Conservative MP first. And he'd said all sorts of terrible things about the Labour Party, which no doubt the Conservatives in Bury South at the next election, and indeed maybe others too, will be holding against.
And the Bury South Labour, like CLP, the Labour Bury South CLP aren't even allowed to choose another one. They're not even allowed to have the trigger process. It's being protected from the top by the leader of the opposition office. It's ridiculous.
The party, so that it's double standards, frankly, and the manipulation. I mean, you know, I mean, for instance, the regional director of the London Labour Party, a woman called acting regional director, a woman called Perline Sanga, has voiced her support for candidates, one in her region and one, well, in a mild way, but at least, you know, made it clear where she stands, both on Twitter in the London region and one who was just outside the London region. And so if people on the left break the rules, that's it, they're out, you know, they're finished. And it's just the double standards of the whole thing, I think.
I mean, you mentioned obviously Christian Wakeford, and obviously he's got his voting record for a start, made some inflammatory speeches about migrants, denounced the Labour Party in very aggressive terms. But just another example in terms of, you know, Darren Rodwell.
Christian Wakeford is another example of when Liberals just have stopped caring about winning. Stop caring about your policy and only care about winning, right? It's like, well, we think we just want the best ability to win in Bury South. I'm like, yeah, but at what cost? Like, what kind of ideological position are you expecting this person to take, given their voting record in Parliament? Even outside of the voting record, because that's influenced, obviously, by the party whips of whichever party that you're a member of. But not just that, but also the speeches that he's made in Parliament. Kuba, welcome to the No Justice stream. Thank you very much for the follow. Hope you're doing well. Like, the kind of political points that he has raised when speaking in Parliament are just completely antithetical to all Labour values, right? But the problem is that a lot of these Liberals, they don't have Labour values, they have anti-Tory values. They have the values of, we want the Tories out, we don't care who replaces them. They have no principles at all. And these people are, as I mentioned on stream 1,000 times now, these are the real entryists, right? These are the people who don't have actual Labour values, who are trying to change the core values of Labour from within through entryism, right? As I've said before, like, even people like Kinnock, right? Pretty centre-left, centre to centre-left, right? Even he had, like, funds, like, tax breaks for cooperatives and renationalising the national grid in his 1992 manifesto, right? Labour has always been a party which is a convenient alliance of social democrats and democratic socialists, for sure. And so Neil Kinnock is definitely part of that as a kind of, you know, centrist social democrat type, right? But it's because of Blair and people like Starmer and the Liberals joining in because they want to be able to join the party that beats the Conservatives, but not just join the party to be able to get them out, but to change the party from within to try and make it a liberal party rather than a social democratic party to fit their worldview, rather than joining the Labour Party for its effective utility and also standing on the same platform as it. These people are the real entryists, and people spend their entire time living in the 1980s as if it's literally like Corbyn is militant tendency part 2, despite the fact that everything that was in the 2017 and 2019 manifestos, everything that Corbyn and people like McDonnell have said publicly about policy platforms that they support is well within the bounds of democratic socialism and well within the bounds of the Labour Party platform. Whereas the Liberals, who have now taken over the party, the entryists Liberals who've taken over the party, these are the people who are standing antithetical to Labour values by standing on a liberal platform, right? It's nonsensical. It's completely nonsensical. All right, Black Movie, how you doing?
Well, who is a council leader, but who is supportive of the leadership. And he's been selected for Labour in Barking Dagenham, despite once joking at Black History Month event that he had the worst possible tan for a black man, adding, "I have the passion and the rhythm of the African and the Caribbean. I used to do swing dance, but because I used to love jiggling about." I mean, just crass.
Well, I actually would defend Darren Rodwell on that. I've looked at the wider event.
Right.
And I just think within the context of the afternoon, you know, that he was dressed up in African, he was asked to dress up in African dress. I don't think that comment was racist, but I think it was unwise, and he should have thought ahead. And actually, I think he's one of the more interesting candidates because he's sort of, I mean, I call him Blue Labour, although he denies that. But he's one of these, you know, he's one of these people. He's got a picture of the Queen on his office wall in his leader's office, and he, I think, understands why Labour voters, in fact, in his borough, the only borough to vote for Brexit, he understands, I think, why Labour voters, lots of working class Labour voters, voted for Brexit in the way the rest of the party doesn't. So actually, my view is he is one of the more interesting candidates and will be something of an asset. I don't think that comment was racist, but I can see that lots of people do.
I suppose the point I'm making is that the standards applied.
He did actually, also, to be fair to the London region this time, he did actually get hauled before a committee and they did give him a pretty hard time. Before deciding to let his candidature go ahead. I suspect if somebody on the left had said that...
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
If it was in an anti-Semitic context, which is the thing that people are often accused of, or liking people who've been anti-Semite, you know, all of that.
That'll be that hierarchy of racism that I've been hearing so much about.
All of that, which is incredibly complicated stuff.
Yeah.
Then he would have been out as well, yeah.
So you wrote this article for Unheard, which is a headline, "Starmer's ruthless attack on the left," almost the same title as this show, to be honest. Labour selection process verges on corruption, is what you say.
Yeah.
Now, why do you mean corruption?
Well, in that people in positions of power are clearly not abiding by the rules. And I mean, for instance, it's astonishing how what I call the anointed candidates, what you might call the lotto candidates, the leader of the opposition candidates, how so often they seem to get hold of membership lists ahead of the rest of the candidates. So under the rules, a candidate can only have the membership list for a constituency party about a fortnight before the actual selection meeting, which doesn't give them very long, 14 days, sometimes less than that, to go around all the members. And some of these local parties have still got 1,000, 2,000 members. So it's almost impossible. But somehow, some of these anointed candidates seem to get hold of membership lists way ahead, 6 months ahead, which gives them plenty of time to go around knocking on doors, literally, emailing people, ringing them up. And that is not only against the rules, it's actually against the law, I think, data protection law. And there are all sorts of other ways in which clearly officials of the party at one level or another are not abiding by the rules. I mean, there are also rules on spending as well, which some of these establishment candidates seem to have ignored
But again, as far as Liberals are concerned, breaking the rules is fine as long as it's being used to delegitimize the left, because again, they view their political positions as being inherently more legitimate because most probably just because of her horseshoe theory nonsense, because they genuinely believe that everyone who's on the left of the party is just the same as everyone who's on the far right, because this is just faux populism, these are cranks, etc. So they view our politics as illegitimate, so they believe that there is somehow some utility in excluding us from the political process altogether.
In a huge way. I mean, you're only supposed to spend £1,000 or two. It depends on how many members there are in the party. Well, clearly, some people have been spending way.
It's the same political position as people who say that we cannot have proportional representation because it would give too much voice to the political fringes. I'm just like, well, do they not? They're not allowed a voice within a politically pluralistic society, right? Not saying that I agree with UKIP, right? But it was pretty silly that UKIP got like 12% of the vote one year, or something crazy like that. It was definitely in double figures, and still coming out with like 0 seats until Douglas Carswell defected, right? That is not a good democratic position. But people who, just like myself, disagree vehemently with UKIP's positions think that it's good that we have an electoral system where they can have a huge swathe of the party votes, just like with the Green Party does on the left as well. You get 0 representation for that within the Commons, and that's a lot of the defence that we got. Amusingly, up until now, in which, especially on the right of the political spectrum, like right-leaning Liberals who vote Conservative, who are now desperate for proportional representation because they want to make sure that Keir Starmer doesn't have any power to do exactly what they want to do with their own ideological platform. But nevertheless, I digress.
Beyond that, with videos and websites, and there was a guy the other day, he had an ad van at the...
I mean, true, my rear end, but at no point was Caleb Maupin a member of the Labour Party.
Selection meeting, and the party's turned a blind eye to that, and the party officials have also, I think, have dismissed a lot of the objections made by people in the selection processes that members were excluded unfairly from the selection processes. I mean, it's incredibly Machiavellian, all of this, incredibly detailed and claim and counterclaim. I mean, in a way, as a journalist, I love it because it's politics in the raw. It's the kind of politics that never gets or rarely gets reported properly, in my view, in the traditional media, because it's regarded as too parochial. But if you add up all what's going on in each of these places, it does paint a very interesting picture, and I think it gives away a lot about what a Starmer government will be like. Now, the fascinating thing is, to what extent does Starmer know what's being done in his name? Does he know all these little tricks that party officials around the country are playing, and the manipulation of the long list and the exclusion of people from their long list because they're a threat to the establishment candidate? I mean, that sort of thing's always gone on, but it's just going on a lot more this time. And is Starmer aware of all that? Or is he basically just sort of delegated it to his...
I can't imagine any situation where he's not already aware of that, considering like the amount to which that he has tried to exclude, for example, Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party moving forward, right? Be able to try and exclude him from standing as a candidate in the next election. It seems to me like the positions that he's taking, the internal stuff he's doing within the party, and the ways in which that he is also in his office have snubbed, like, for example, motions on the Green New Deal at the Labour conference, etc. All of these things, when you take these in a totality, I can't imagine a situation where he isn't aware. Like, obviously, I can't prove that, but this is just inference from the rest of the evidence that shows he's happy with doing a bunch of other undemocratic stuff to be able to get his way and impose his ideology from the top down.
To his henchmen and said, "You get on with that. I don't want to know."
Well, on that, so
it doesn't reflect very well on him, I don't think.
Well, in the article, what you wrote, so the point you made is, by contrast to successful Labour administrations of Attlee, Wilson, even Blair, all had significant representation from the left: Nye Bevan, Dick Crossman, Barbara Castle, Michael Foot, Tony Benn, Claire Short, and John Prescott, to name a few. You also wrote, it is not inconceivable that if Angela Rayner, John Prescott, Margaret Beckett, or Neil Kinnock now applied to be a candidate, they would be blocked at the first hurdle by an EC panel. Of course, the likes of, say, Margaret Beckett, for those who don't know, started off very much on the left of the Labour Party. She was in the Socialist Campaign Group until 1988. Once denounced Neil Kinnock for abstaining in the deputy leadership.
Well, yeah, that's why the Emma Townsend, I think that's her name. Sorry, Emma Townsend, I think it was. That's why she got stopped from standing on the long list, right? Because she liked to tweet by Nicola Sturgeon. But there's also an interesting point that just raised there, that current Labour front benchers probably would be excluded on the same kind of grounds that we're looking through with regards to the ideological purging that we're getting within the Labour Party at the moment. And the other point is also very well made by Crick in that article as well, in we didn't get this under Blair, right? People like Jeremy Corbyn, who voted against the Labour whip, which over 400 times during the Blair administration. But may I remind everybody, there's only 7 of these times where he voted with the Tories. So Corbyn was voting against right-wing policy from the Labour Party because there's still policy that the Tories agreed when it was going through the Commons. So it's not exactly somehow being traitorous to the Labour Party to vote against both them and the Conservatives on right-wing legislation. Let's be real about that. But, was he ever thrown out of the party? Did they ever have his loyalty questioned at that point? No, people just accepted that there was a left wing of the Labour Party who had a substantial disagreements with the leadership of the party, but it never became an ideological purge, right? And if the CLP wanted to select a left-wing candidate, there was at least ample opportunity for them to be able to do so. But that's not the case now, right? Keir Starmer is far more authoritarian than Blair is at that point, especially considering we have Starmer on record as saying that he wants to electronically tag asylum seekers, which is it's incredibly inhumane. I mean, obviously there was plenty of inhumane things that Tony Blair did, but has Keir Starmer ever kind of denounced them? No. And considering that he has asked for electoral help from Tony Blair and the Tony Blair Institute, it seems reasonable to expect that Keir Starmer does not exactly have a low view of Blair as a political actor. So these kind of things would tend to support the idea that Keir Starmer would tacitly support the same kind of platform that Blair went through, plus also all of the new awful authoritarian shit that he's saying right now, like trying to ban VPNs, which obviously wouldn't even work, but even so.
Leadership battle between Dennis Healey and Tony Benn.
It's so good for someone so young.
I mean, I'm not as young as I look.
Then, were you?
I was essentially born into the Labour Party, unfortunately.
And you were militant, weren't you? Is that right?
No, my father was the South Yorkshire organiser of a militant tendency.
Oh, right.
But me and my
and
I know,
and indeed some of the methods are rather similar.
they didn't have the leadership, but yeah, I mean,
and it shows how far the political Overton window has shifted in the so like European social democratic political platforms are being looked at by the liberal media and political establishment as being in somehow compared to the kind of Trotskyist ideological bent of militant tendency in the 80s, right? That's how far right we've gone as a country, in that just saying maybe certain utilities shouldn't be run for profit and should be state-owned because they're natural monopoly is literally like saying we should seize the means of production. Like, that's how far the Overton windows had to shift to get to this point.
Yeah,
of course they had a leadership. I mean,
no, as in they didn't have a party leadership doing these stitch-ups, is what I mean.
No. But I'm saying that militant in the way they operated, I mean, it's all underhand stuff. It's what makes it. Anyway, carry on.
What I was going to ask you about this is what just on this kind of basically war to destroy the left, because. So in Keir Starmer's leadership campaign, what they did was a plausible deniability in terms of we've got a broad church, because he brought on Morgan McSweeney.
All right, Edward and Dan, good to have you on stream.
For example, who ran Liz Kendall's campaign for the party leadership. She only got 4.5%. They went back to the drawing board and came up with a better strategy, as it turned out. But anyway, you had Morgan McSweeney, you had fixers for the Labour right, like Matt Pound. For those who don't know, this is just a Labour right fixer. That's the old Labour right.
He used to run the. He used to work for this body, Labour First, that's been around a long time. Right-wing Labour body. They hate us using the term right-wing, but I think it's accurate. People know what we mean.
To be fair.
And he would Matt Pound was very successful actually before the last election when Corbyn was in power at actually making sure that right-wing candidates did get selected in all sorts of places. But now
thing is, and yeah, Michael Crick is right as well. Is that he will say like right wing Labour candidates. And people on Twitter, especially right wing Labour members, will talk about saying there's no right wing of the Labour Party. Well, first of all, like in the context that Michael Crick is talking about, he's talking about it relative to the rest of the party. They are on the right wing of the party. I'm sure Michael Crick believes that these people are left wing, nominally within a national context, but within an internal Labour context, they're on the right wing of the party. I'm sure that's what Crick means, but I don't know if Owen's going to make this point. I've just interrupted him. But as far as I'm concerned, yeah, these people are right-wing. They have right-wing political platforms and political ideologies. That's why they're happy to agree with the Tories on so much, and why they're happy to have an ex-Tory within their midst and being given the whip, right? These are people these are right-wing ideologues. Like, or at the very least, just slightly right of centre at the very least. Like, you look at the kind of policy platforms and the kind of things they say and the kind of policies they advocate for. Like, it's monetarist fiscal policy, it's interventionist foreign policy, it's reactionary social policy, right? These are all things that they're not left wing at all. This is all adhering to the neoliberal consensus. You can't, like, I would firmly call these people right wing in a national perspective, as much as to the chagrin of people like Ben Bradshaw, who claim there's no right wing of the Labour Party. Well, I'm sorry. What did you think that the Labour Party did under Blair when they were actually privatising things, for example, like HS1? Given that they promised to nationalise the rail, they actually privatised even more of it under the Blair administration, introducing tuition fees, turning them into a liberalised service, a liberalised company and business, rather than a public service again, like they were when they were actually free of a point of use under the Thatcher and Major, right? The Blair administration was right wing, and so is Keir Starmer's would be. Like, these are right wing policies. Just because they're doing neoliberalism but nicer doesn't make it not neoliberalism, right?
He's doing it sort of officially for the party.
I don't know. In terms of Labour right wingers, Luke Akehurst is one of the main Labour First people, calls himself a Labour right winger and talks about the Labour right. So I think we can get away with that. But the point I make is they brought.
And also, he's so right wing that he thinks the US was correct to invade Vietnam during the Resistance War. That's how right wing Luke Akehurst is, especially on something like foreign policy, for example, and most likely on domestic policy as well, and domestic economic policy, considering he's part of Labour First to back people like Keir Starmer. Didn't Owen release a video a few days prior to this one explaining why he's going to vote for Labour? I mean, his point was one of utilitarian calculus mostly. Whether or not he is correct in his assertion that you can push Labour Party to the left, I think he is incorrect. But I at least understand where he's coming from. Like, I like Owen Jones. Like, I've been on the fence of voting Labour. For a very long time, and I think there are arguments both for and against, right? Like, it's still up in the air as far as I'm concerned. I think my position really should be your vote for Labour should entirely be contingent on the party selected candidate. If you feel like the candidate themselves is sufficiently left-wing enough, so much so that they would vote against authoritarian and or right-wing legislation in the Commons, then I think it's worth supporting them, even if it would give Keir Starmer a majority, because then it would be a majority which would rely on people's votes to be able to get legislation through Parliament. If they are, however, a member of the Labour right-wing, if they're a parachuted candidate, if they're somebody who's going to show in total fealty to the leader of the opposition, then you shouldn't vote for them. Like, that's why I'm happy to vote for, if in my constituency, which is Broxtowe, if Greg Marshall runs again as the candidate, I'd happily support him, because I believe he's a genuine democratic socialist, and I think that having his voice in Parliament would be better than not. But if it's a right-wing Labour MP who's been inserted by the party establishment, who's a member of like Labour Twin or Labour First or any of these other right-wing groups, who's just going to consistently green-light right-wing legislation from the Labour top brass, then that's someone who I wouldn't support, because at that point, how are they functionally any different to having a Conservative as your MP? I don't think so, right? People forget about local politics all the time, and I think that's also really important, is thinking about what it's going to mean for your local area, who's in charge, right? So I think it's more nuanced than both Owen and also his detractors have said on places like Twitter. Yeah, again, that's why I think Ed makes a good point about how the right Labour Party want to kill the Union Link and have the US Democratic Party within the UK just call the Labour Party. And I think that's a really good point to make, which is why having members of the PLP who are, especially if they're union backed, right, if they're union backed candidates standing in to be that MP, then they're going to be people who are going to be standing against the breaking of the union link. And I think these are all things you need to take into account when you think about who you're going to vote for in your constituency. So it's very murky and it's not as cut and dry, I think, that neither Owen nor people who disagree with him would believe. It's difficult. It's going to... I'm not fully on board with either position just yet, but that's my position currently, is it's based on how you feel about the candidate in your local area.
On some Corbyn people, like Simon Fletcher and Annalise Midgley, but then just got rid of them and then kept the right wing fixers. But Morgan McSweeney, who is now Labour's election campaign director, according to Nick Forbes, who's the former leader of Newcastle City Council, I did an event with him years ago, he said that Morgan McSweeney doesn't have room for compromise with the hard left. He thinks they need to be eradicated from the party because they are so dangerous. That's the point, isn't it? This is actually about just purging the Labour left in a way that no previous Labour administration, not Kinnock, not Blair, has tried to do.
Yeah, I think that is what they want to do, and I mean the fact they want a gun for everybody, they want to line them all up against a wall with a machine gun and
yeah, if you're in a safe Labour seat, yeah, just do whatever. Like if Breakthrough are in your constituency, vote for the Breakthrough Party. I really like their platform, and Joe Skeeping, their comms officer, I've had him on streams talk. Nice guy, really smart and intelligent, with again good political chops. So if Breakthrough, for by some miracle, are running in your seat and it's a safe Labour seat, absolutely 100%, I would recommend voting for the Breakthrough Party or the Green Party or something like that. Although obviously the Green Party do have an issue with transphobia, but then again, so does every political party who isn't the Breakthrough Party at this point. So do what you want, but
eliminate them. And it suggests to me that actually they would like the left to leave and form their own party, which may well happen. I mean, I think one of the interesting scenarios right now that people aren't discussing enough is what happens if you get that Starmer is prime minister but without a majority, and that has got to be a very strong chance, because to get a majority of one, Labour needs a lead of 12%, which is huge in historic terms. Blair only got 12.8% in 1997. The reward then was a majority of 177, but now the electoral map is different and the arithmetic's different, and I think there must be a very strong chance there will be only.
I mean, I think it's worth expanding on that point a lot, and I think a lot of journalists are doing their readers and their viewers and their listeners dirty by not expanding on points like these, in that we say, well, the arithmetic's changed. I'm like, yeah, the arithmetic's changed because of huge amounts of demographic shift, right? The fact that, the way the economy of this country works and the kind of one-sided topsy-turvy nature of our economy explicitly to benefit older people at the expense of younger people has led to a huge divergence in voting patterns, and also about the ways in where demographics are placed in the country. And now, because of the way things have worked out, I'm not going to go into the full details, but young people are now predominantly coalesced within city constituencies, which are already heavily Labour and are getting even more Labour at that time, because there are no jobs left because of the demise of manufacturing and suburban seats, which are now fundamentally Tory, because the old industrial workers of those times have now retired and now own houses in these constituencies, and their kids have moved away to live in Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, whatever. So there's a huge amount of demographic shift, and that's why first past the post is incredibly toxic, because these incredibly safe Labour seats, if that vote continues to conglomerate those areas, even huge Labour leads wouldn't even lead to a majority, which is crazy to think, as Michael Crick is pointing out here. It is crazy, but do you want to expand on why that is a little?
A minority Labour government, and given that most constituency parties in the Labour Party now would want proportional representation, you could see them doing a deal with the Lib Dems, who are going to strike a much tougher bargain than they did with Cameron 12 years ago, or indeed when they struck bargains with Blair and Callaghan.
Yeah, if you look, for example, at, especially not just in how the demographics have shifted, but how their voting patterns have changed. In the kind of new Labour years, New Labour won the middle class kind of homeowner vote, which then slowly shifted towards Cameron and has stayed with Cameron ever since, right? Especially as the population has aged and home ownership has become far more, the rate at which people buy their first homes, for example, that's got even higher as time's gone on, right? The average age at which people buy their first house is much higher now than it was, even 15, 20 years ago. And the way in which our electoral maths has worked out is the gap between how much young people vote Labour and how much old people vote Conservative, for example, that gap is now much wider than it ever has been. There's been this large political lie for a very long time that people get more right wing as they get older, when really that wasn't the case for a very, very long time. Although that happened to a slight amount, most people continued voting within their kind of socioeconomic class the entirety of their lifetime, right? I mean, obviously Thatcher won the youth vote, for example. That's a big kind of divergence from what people would think would usually happen. But for a very, very long time, people voted within their own socioeconomic strata. If you're working class, you vote Labour. If you're middle class, you vote Conservative for a very, very long time, and that never really changed that much. It's only a recent phenomenon that older people have just completely voted Conservative, and I am firmly of the belief that the weight in which housing has become over-commodified and so many older people have become accidental landlords over time, or accidentally gained additional property wealth, etc., or their property wealth has massively spiraled out of control and they've become protective of it as an asset value that they have, that's pushed these people over to the right. And that was the case in 2010 and in 2015. The visibility for Brexit across multiple demographics in those areas trying to overturn it was like recruiting a sergeant in the north. Well, that's why I believe that. That's why I also believe that we saw such a massive deficit between 2017 and 2019 for Labour, because they tried going for the Brexit voters in 2017 by honouring the deal and trying to promise a workers' first Brexit, and then they promised the stupid second referendum in 2019. Rather than going for just having soft Brexit as a policy platform, which is, again, frustratingly, something that you have to lie at the feet of Remainers who refuse to compromise, who wanted to reverse Brexit rather than accepting defeat in the referendum and then trying to put forward some kind of compromise soft Brexit position to be able to honour the referendum whilst also being able to minimise the economic damage. Incredibly frustrating, but yeah, that's why, again, 2017. If you look at the demographics of 2017 as well, in the 2017 election, if you look at it by employment status, the only employment status which majority voted for Conservative was the retired. Every single other people who were employed, whether it was self-employed, full-time, part-time, disabled, unemployed, carers, all these people or whatever, they all voted majority Jeremy Corbyn for or plurality at least for Jeremy Corbyn for different degrees, right? But retired voted overwhelmingly, and it's like fucking 60 to 15% for the Conservatives. So there is a really huge gap between the interests of the material interests of these groups over time, and it's quite frankly a miracle that, for example, the red wall stayed red for as long as it did, considering how old and property owning those generations are, right? They have been natural Conservatives for a while, and it's only because of the decimation of their area of the country by Thatcher that they remained red for so long. That's why Boris Johnson was really good at appealing to them with the things like the levelling up platform that he ran on, where he said, we're going to actually invest in the north. Theoretically, that's what he said, not that he did any of it, for example, because it was explicitly to try and court these red wall voters, because they knew that these people were ripe for voting for Conservative based on their own material conditions, but they needed to be convinced that the north was safe under the Conservatives, and that's what Boris Johnson tried to do. Because again, as I've mentioned before on this channel, Boris Johnson's platform was much further to the left than any other Conservative platform that we've had for the last 40 years, 50 years or so. He's certainly more centrist out of all of, at least on economic policy, if you discount his privatisation of the NHS, than a lot more of the other candidates you could possibly have had. Like, levelling up as an explicitly interventionist, like centralised, fiscally expansionary political platform, which you wouldn't have gotten that from Philip Hammond or George Osborne. You really wouldn't have done, or even people like Michael Howard. So Boris Johnson really was the perfect candidate in that election. Old people still tell me about Brown giving them 75p. They're like the elephants to never forget, even they were staunch Labour voters in their working life. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, these people, again, it's really, really weird, like the way the voting patterns work. But, I think a lot of it is just excuses, because they know that the Conservative Party have their specific material interests at heart, but they don't want to admit for voting for the nasty party. I mean, I get it, Black Move. I get that they wanted the Brexit stuff over with, which is why, again, the second referendum policy was so silly
in the past. And you could see PR coming in, and that would be the moment, perhaps, that the left would be, decide it's better off leaving, and that they then, under a PR system, would get a small group in Parliament. And of course, that would also give a boost to the Farage right as well. And there clearly is a relationship, a stronger relationship between the Starmer and Davey, they may never even talk, but you saw in those by-elections last year the way that Labour went for one and the Lib Dems went for another, and you're seeing it in local government elections. I think there's a growing understanding between the parties, which may well come to fruition if Labour doesn't get a majority. If Labour does get a majority, then like 1997, the Liberal Democrats will have to get lost.
Michael, just lastly, because as we both said, the danger is a lot of people look at this and think it's quite parochial. It's the internal machinations of a political party. We're both political nerds. I think we've established that in this particular chat, but I think people are already aware of that. For most people, they think, look, all I care about is voting for a political party that addresses my needs and concerns. Why do I care about what they're doing internally? So the question I'm asking you is, why does this matter for our democracy? And what do you think it says about Keir Starmer in terms of how, or Starmer government would approach dissent, if you like, but from within and from without?
I think he will crack down on dissent within the Parliamentary Labour Party, even more strongly than Labour governments have in the past. And I think that life may be very difficult for people like us, inquisitive and curious journalists who may, I
mean, very few of them in the UK, Michael, but okay, toot your own horn.
I think they may not be that friendly towards the media. I mean, if you are as authoritarian as this is, then that tends to also be part of the package. The reason why this is important is that MPs aren't just MPs; they're the pool of people from whom Labour governments, future Labour governments, or any governments are chosen. And you need to have people of sufficient calibre to be ministers. And what's worth looking at is who's being chosen instead of all. And they tend to be pretty dull. They tend to be overwhelmingly people who've served as councillors. Now, I've got nothing against the councillors being MPs, but you also need people who have got bigger picture backgrounds, people with experience in economics, foreign policy, defence, development, and
working class candidates. The point you made is there's a lack of working class.
There are virtually no working class. I mean, there's a woman standing in Doncaster Central who's a prison officer. Yeah. There was a woman who was a postwoman who tried to get the West Lancashire the nomination a by-election if Rosie Cooper decides to stand down. She was purged from the selection process. Very few people with working class background. No black people so far. Ethnic minorities are doing pretty badly. I think there have been 7 so far, but they're all.
Oh, look, Miata Fanbele, she's a singular black person who's been stood up as the candidate for the very safe seat of Camberwell and Peckham. And actually, I think that she's probably a little bit more left-wing than she lets on. I think she's done a really good job of hiding her power level, and I actually really like her. I think the new Economics Foundation do really good work. And I would just wish more of these people from the NEF were standing as Labour candidates, and then I might be happier. But unfortunately, a single Miata Fanbele does not a proper Labour Party make.
All of Asian background. Astonishingly, Labour is not.
Not from Miata, sorry, in Camberwell and Peckham.
Oh yes, sorry, yes, that's right. Yeah, but so 6 what? So
I think she's more lefty than she's letting on. I think she's more lefty than she's letting on. I mean, when she explicitly opposed the £50 billion black hole line that's being pushed by the media to try and hamstring fiscal expansion for future governments, especially any future Labour Party government, right? So, the position that she is explicit, because she's been on stream with Owen Jones talking about the fact that the quote unquote fiscal black hole is only, and on Twitter as well, is only actually that only actually exists if you view through the lens of what the OBR says should be fiscal policy moving forward, about how much debt has to be able to be reduced as a percentage of GDP over what time period, right? So it's not some hard and fast number. It's based upon a bunch of rules set out by the OBR rather than any kind of material specifics, right?
6 Asian and 1 black, but no black women. No black men.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. You're absolutely right, Theo. You're absolutely right in that. Turns out, right, during an economic downturn, fiscal expansion is good. Actually, you can have a strong economy by engaging in fiscal expansion. Just wish someone had told George Osborne that. But again, that was a right-wing belief that was purged through neoliberalism. Ted Heath, Harold Macmillan, these are people who would absolutely have supported fiscal expansion during economic downturns, but unfortunately we live in the austerity world now. I mean, to be fair, Jeremy Hunt said there's going to be infrastructure projects, so I guess I can, that's something. But they're also predicting huge amounts of spending cuts in years in 2025 and onwards, amusingly after the election, and leaving Labour with the theoretical poison chalice. But But again, Zio, this is just a lot of this is going to again just neoliberal brain poison. FaZe, welcome to the No Justice stream. Thank you for the follow. Neoliberalism has taken over so much of the kind of headspace of the economic right in this country that they just refuse to do any fiscal expansion whatsoever. For the last 12 years, they probably had huge numbers of, positive cost-benefit analysis, infrastructure projects on the books that they could just do, and they've just not done anything. They've not done any of it. They've just ideologically purged any amount of fiscal expansionary policy from any future budget because there's been this lie being told through the media that not engaging in fiscal expansion is default fiscal responsibility, when that's just the reverse is the case, especially when we're coming out of the 2008 financial crisis. It's in a weird position. The Conservative Party is driven purely by ideology, not sound economics. That's certainly been the case, Dan, especially for the last 43 years post-Thatcher. I will give Heath and Macmillan their due respect for their centrist political economic policy platforms, right? I think that Harold Macmillan is probably to the left of Keir Starmer, quite frankly, especially on economic policy. And this is not the traditional platform of the Conservative Party, as much as people would like to tell you that it is. The traditional platform of the Conservative Party is not neoliberalism. This is a relatively new position for them to take, especially, for example, something like the railways, which even Thatcher said she wouldn't have privatised. That was a John Major thing. Actually, I think more things got privatised under John Major than under Thatcher, because again, people start viewing Thatcherism as a religion. The neoliberalism is a religion to these people. They don't care about whether or not privatisation is good or has positive outcomes or what the negative externalities are. They believe it must be good, therefore they do it over and over again because they have a functional belief in it being good. When we've seen the negative externalities, especially when you look at what's happened to the public services of this country over the past 40 years, we have seen the negative externalities, and that's why young people are fighting against it right now. No one's fooling themselves that the OBR were able to predict the future. It was only the absence of them having a go that fueled the gilt market panic. Well, that's true, actually, yeah. The fact that Kwarteng and Trust refused to even publish the Treasury guidelines and the OBR forecasts when giving the fiscal event was why we had such a huge panic on the gilt market. Although hopefully with the introduction of digital fiat currency, we'll be able to avoid gilt markets altogether moving forward.
Chosen for a Labour seat, believe it or not, for 11 years now, but for a winnable Labour seat. So a winnable seat for Labour, let me rephrase that. No black men have been chosen for a winnable seat for Labour since Clive Lewis was chosen in 2011. So there's deficiencies here, but it's overwhelmingly people with council backgrounds. And I hate to be snobbish about this, and there's about 13 of the candidates have been council leaders or deputy leaders. People who run councils don't actually make very good Westminster politicians. I think Mr. Rodwell, we discussed earlier, might be an interesting addition. He may not be a great minister, but I'm sure he's going to be one of the characters of the Commons. But I think you've got to have people with experience of big picture stuff. And I think that Starmer knows that. And towards the end of the process, it's going to be even more blatant. It's going to be much more what is disparagingly called parachuting people in, which I call slotting people in. I think it's understandable a leader should do a bit of that. Because you need a few of your advisors in as MPs, and you need to really make sure that your cabinet is full of people who are, really clever and formidable, able to deal with the civil service and deal with big problems. But at this stage, it's just the sort of annihilation, really, of the left, and the left is incredibly demoralised. Well, you know better than I do.
Hi.
It's not even bothering, it's not even bothering to contest these places because they know they won't get anywhere. And of course, a lot of left-wing members have left.
Well, I'm about to talk about that, of course, with John McDonnell. Hopefully, we'll both be full of cheer, I'm sure, by the end of that particular conversation. Michael, it's been such an honour to chat to you. And I have to say, it really is testament to your journalistic integrity, your political and intellectual curiosity, because this does matter.
You're laying on a bit thick here. No.
I mean, the UK journalism is just so fucked at this point, right? That even basic research, like saying, isn't it a bit weird how people, how that there is just huge amounts of internal top-down hierarchy being imposed to subvert democracy within the Labour Party, to be able to field candidates and try and strong-arm the party towards an ideological bend that's not in keeping with its party traditions and its party roots, right? It shouldn't be that we should be lauding someone's integrity and intellectual curiosity for reporting on basic facts. But unfortunately, the level of UK journalism is so pathetic. These people are so close to power and are so intent on maintaining their relationship with power that the single journalist who's actually bothered to talk about this shit will have praise heaped on them from the left for simply doing the basics of their job. Which, to be fair, I'm glad that he's done it, but it's ridiculous that it's taken this long for anyone to actually start to talk about this shit. It really is absolutely ridiculous that this is how far we've gone, right? I was doing some research on this kind of stuff, and like the amount of people who become journalists and then have links to the Downing Street or the Commons or vice versa. It's crazy. Like, I was rewatching the 2017 ITV election coverage. Their political analyst was Allegra Stratton, who then became literally the spokeswoman for Downing Street, the one who had to leave in tears because she was joking about the fact that they were not obeying lockdown restrictions in Downing Street. And then I was looking at Ben Kentish's history. He was like a media and political advisor for the Commons before joining LBC, having worked having graduated from fucking Cambridge University. It's all, as George Carlin says, every single time, it's all one big club and you're not in it. And quite frankly, I'm glad that we have anybody who has some amount of integrity, as Michael Crick, to be able to shine a light on basic stuff like, you know, internal party machinations that would otherwise go under the eye. Because again, if you're a liberal journalist in this country, it is within your remit to not report on these things because it fits in with your ideological bent of being authoritarian, delegitimizing the leftist political actors, because that's what the press have spent the last 5 years doing because of Jeremy Corbyn. It's like, and yeah, it's the UK journalism sphere is pathetic. I know I say this over and over and over and over and over again, but they really are just the absolute worst. Definitely worse than American journalists, for example. But also, if you're enjoying the content, please do like and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, you can become a member for 99p. Less than a can of beer. You can become a member and support the channel. It helps boost the stream and the algorithm as well. So please do that if you'd like to. And click the bell on YouTube. It'll let you know when I go live too.